Hi, this is Dorie Clark, and we are here with Newsweek. Our show is better, and every week we are turning to some of the leading lights in the business world to learn how to improve our lives. And today we're here with Daniel Pink, who is the author of the new book. We even have a prop, The Power of Regret. And Dan is joining us from San Francisco on his book tour. Dan, it's wonderful to have you here.
Dorie, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in. I see comments already streaming in. If you're joining us live, please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are calling in from. We're going to be taking your questions for Daniel Pink, and we want to hear what's on your mind. So, Dan, the first question that I have is, in your book, the Power of Regret, most people, of course, think of regret as a negative emotion, something that they, don't want to have, they don't want to deal with. But you are arguing that this is not a bug in the human psyche, that it's actually a feature, that there's some positive elements. Why is it that evolution seems to think that this painful, uncomfortable thing is good for us?
Great point. I mean, I wish I had used that phrase. It is a feature, not a bug. That's a great way to put it. But here's the thing. Let's acknowledge first, exactly, you said, Dorie, that it is negative. It's a negative emotion. We don't like it. I don't like experiencing regret. Nobody likes experiencing regret. And you've hit on a conundrum. Exactly. So here you have this thing. We are these pleasure-seeking creatures, and yet we have this thing that is ubiquitous, this emotion that is ubiquitous. It feels bad. Why does it exist? It exists because it's good for us. Because it instructs, because it clarifies if we deal with it right, which is why this philosophy of no regrets, which is so popular out there, is a bad idea. Evolution programmed, our cognitive machinery is pre-programmed for regret because it's useful if we deal with it right. It can help us make better decisions. It can help us deepen our sense of meaning. It can help us solve problems more quickly and more easily. And the question is, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with it effectively? Not ignoring our regrets, not wallowing in them, but using them as signals for improvement.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And one of the aspects of the book, Dan, that I thought was fascinating is you talked about how all the research over the years, it seemed you were very comprehensive in surveying the research literature that, for 50 plus years, people seemed to group regrets categorically. Oh, it's a regret about relationships. It's a regret about work. And you have discovered in the course of your analysis these four sort of underlying structures about types of regrets that actually can unveil a lot more about how humans think about regret and what they want to do, what they wish they had done. Can you talk to us briefly about what those four underlying categories are?
Sure. So this is so for years, exactly as you say, Dorie, scholars, pollsters and scholars have tried to group people's regrets into the domains of life. This is a family regret. This is a career regret. This is a romance regret. I did a piece of quantitative research of my own where I did the same thing, where I asked people their regrets and had them group them into these domains. And what the conclusion that I and others kept coming to is like, wow, people's regrets are all over the place. Okay. So I also did something else where I collected 16,000 regrets from people in 105 countries. And what I found is that when you actually read over these things, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, you notice something happening beneath the surface, precisely as you say. So so one regret is, one of these four core regrets are what I call foundation regrets. Foundation regrets are, if only I'd done the work. And these are regrets about health. Okay. Oh, I didn't take care of my body. I didn't eat right. And now I'm paying the consequences of that. But there are also regrets about finances. Oh, if only I'd saved more money, I'd been less frivolous. There are regrets about education. If only I'd worked harder in school. So it's small decisions that accumulate and then destabilize your life in the future. So that's foundation regret. Another second regret are boldness regrets. Boldness regrets are, if only I'd taken the chance. And again, exactly as you say, it spans domains. So it's regret about not asking somebody out on a date. It's regret about not traveling. It's regret about not starting a business. You're at a juncture. You can play it safe. You can take the risk. You end up not taking the risk, and you regret it. So that's boldness regrets. Third category, moral regrets. If only I'd done the right thing. Pretty straightforward. You're at a juncture. You can do the right thing. You can do the wrong thing. People do the wrong thing. they regret it. Not everybody, but most of us. and the specifics there, we had in this database of 16,000 regrets, huge numbers of regrets about bullying, very sort of alarming numbers of regrets about marital infidelity. And then the final one is connection regrets, which is if only I'd reached out. And these are all about relationships, not about romantic relationships necessarily. In fact, mostly not romantic relationships, but regrets about friendships, about siblings, about parents, about other kinds of relatives. Relationship should be intact or was intact. It comes apart, usually in a drifting, undramatic way. I should really reach out. No, it's going to be really awkward if I reach out, and they're not going to care. So it drifts even further, and you regret it even more. And so these were the 4 things that came up over and over and over again, interestingly, around the world.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight that gets a little deeper into the core of what we're experiencing. So thank you for sharing that, Dan. We're here with Daniel Pink. He's the author of the new book, The Power of Regret. And if you want to learn more about Dan and this book and his previous books, go to danpink.com. Yes. And there's the book right there. We also wanted to take a moment to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in from around the world. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. We have Ahmed from Switzerland, Raul from Delaware, Becky's here from Georgia, Kristen from Dallas. We've got Robert here from California and Robin in Toronto. Darcy's here in Florida, Todd from New York. We've got Cheryl in Minnesota, Harsha from London, Christopher from Massachusetts, Tanya from Sacramento, Michelle from California, Lynn from Washington, and many more. We're so glad to have you.
Wow,
and please
cool.
feel free. Yeah, so many, right?
Yeah. Well, just from all over. It's great to see.
Yes, it absolutely is. And welcome everyone. Please type your questions for Dan Pink into the chat box. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. And Dan, as folks are doing that, one of the things that I was curious about. So for a lot of people, and you were alluding to this, I mean, regret is not a pleasant emotion. It's not something that we're relishing exactly. But if someone is watching this, if they're in a position where they say, you know, I probably should be looking at my regrets a little bit more, it's something we might hesitate to do because it feels painful. It feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If they're trying to get started, but they feel like there's just sort of this hurdle. How do we actually even get started with that? If, for instance, as in the book, you tell the story about someone who lost touch with her friend for 25 years and just feels so weird, so awkward calling her. How do we actually get someone over that hurdle to take some kind of action or to lean in and face this?
Well, it's a great question, and it's at the core of this idea. And I actually think there's even a bigger question embedded in there, which is like, how do we deal with negative emotions in general? And again, I want to go back to something that you said before, Dorie, which is exactly right. This is a negative emotion. All right. Regret doesn't feel good. Regret instructs, but it doesn't feel good. The thing is, you can't have the instruction without the negative feeling. And so the question is, how do we deal with that negative feeling, which is exactly what you're asking here. And I think that there are 3 relatively simple steps. I sometimes like to look at it as inward, outward, forward. Inward, outward, forward. So inward, you begin with, how do you think about yourself? You have a regret about not keeping in touch with somebody. You have a regret about some moral breach. You treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. The way that we talk to ourselves is typically so cruel, so mean, so vicious. We would never talk that way to anybody else, but we talk that way to ourselves. It's like that old joke where a guy goes to the doctor's office and he says, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, "Don't do that." And so my advice is, don't do that. Don't beat up on yourself. Talk to yourself the way that you would talk to a friend. And so treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Recognize that your regrets are actually not that special. They're very common. They're part of the whole human experience. And that any misstep that you make is a moment in your life, not definitional of your life. So that's inward. Outward. Disclose, man. If you're comfortable disclosing to other people, that's powerful. Even if you simply write about your negative emotions, that is helpful too. What happens is that these negative emotions, this pain, this bad feeling, is very amorphous. And when we convert it into language, either by talking about it or by writing about it, we make it less menacing. They take it from this amorphous negative blob into these very concrete words. That makes it easier to reckon with and make sense of. And then finally, forward. You got to find a lesson from it. And the way we do that is we tend to be terrible at solving our own problems, and pretty good at solving other people's problems. So what you have to do is, in a sense, convert yourself into somebody else. And so you can do it by goofy things like talking to yourself in the third person. So if you're trying to figure out what the lesson is you learned from one of your regrets, Dorie, you don't say, what should I do? You say, what should Dorie do? There's some other kinds of really interesting things like time travel, which I think is really useful with regret, is saying, okay, I'm going to place a phone call to the Dorie of 2027. What does Dorie 2027 want Dorie of 2022 to do right now? And that's often very clear. My favorite decision-making tool of any kind, when you're at a decision point and you're not sure what to do, is ask yourself, what would you tell your best friend to do? And when people do that, they always know. And so what you do, treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt, with self-compassion. Disclose it and make sense of it by converting it to language, and then take a step back and extract a lesson from it. And if we do that, it's not that hard. It's not that complicated. We end up being better, and and here's the thing. It's like, we can ignore our negative emotions, but that's not going to work forever. So when we ignore our negative emotions and they pile up and they finally break down the door, we get completely hobbled by them. And if we just have a way of saying, I have a systematic way of dealing with negative emotions, particularly our most common negative emotion, regret, it's really, really helpful to us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And thanks for encapsulating that so clearly, Dan. That's great. We're here with Daniel Pink. He is the author of the new book, The Power of Regret. You can learn more about him. Check out his work. Sign up for his email list, 170,000 strong, at danpink.com. And we want to say hi to some of the great folks tuning in. We've got Joel from Angola. We have Nathaniel in Austin. Yeah, Angola in the house. Molly's here from Bozeman, Montana. Brian from Seattle. Annette in SoCal. We've got Diane. We've got Jackie in Orlando, Willie from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We've got Peterborough, UK, Japar from Zurich, and many more. Oh, wait. And how can we forget Vashmi Jahan from Baku? So glad to have all of you. Now, Dan, we had a question come in that I
didn't realize you had such a continent, like, well, we have every continent on here except for Antarctica. Where are the Dorie Clark Antarctica fans?
It's true. It's vastly underrepresented. So if Antarctica's in the house,
I heard that you were huge in Antarctica.
I'm sorry to let you down.
Yeah.
Next time we'll get it going. But in the meantime, we have an awesome question from Constance, our fellow author. I believe you actually maybe even blurbed one of her books, if I recall correctly. Constance.
Oh, hey, Constance.
She wants to know, how did you come to be curious about this? You often, Dan, have picked really interesting topics. You had Drive, which was about the science of motivation. You had To Sell is Human, about selling. Free Agent Nation, which was an early book about some of the trends we're experiencing in the workplace today. How did regret come to be your topic?
Well, part of it was I was dealing with, sort of reckoning with regrets on my own, Constance. And again, not to sound like an old man here, but I don't know if I would have written this book in my 30s. I don't think I had enough mileage on me. In my 50s, it felt somewhat inevitable because I had mileage behind me, I had mileage ahead of me, and I was reckoning with it. And the other thing that I found, and I think, Constance and Dorie, as writers yourself, is that when I started thinking about this and was sort of catalyzed by one of my kids' college graduations, I began thinking about my own regrets, and I just ended up talking about them with other people. And I found that people, in contrast to this idea, like, oh my God, don't ever talk about regret, no regrets, that people, when I raised the topic of regret, people leaned in. And again, I want to emphasize, I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean, like, they would say, really, that's so interesting. You know what I mean? And that's a really great reaction. Like, you don't get that reaction with everything. And so, this, Dorie, every once in a while, there's an idea that sort of takes hold and you're like, I got to figure this out. And so it was really just, I was snagged by the curiosity of figuring out this emotion. And then the more I dug, the more I became convinced that we'd totally gotten it wrong. Or to put an even finer point on it, that we'd been sold a bill of goods in the form of the no regrets philosophy.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. That's great. Dan Pink, author of The Power of Regret. Check out his work at danpink.com. And if you want to make sure that you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek sessions, it's every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 Pacific. You can go to dorieclark.com. You can sign up for the email list and get a self-assessment there, and you'll get reminders about these conversations. If you're enjoying this, hit the like and share button so your friends can benefit as well. And Dan, a great question came in from Todd, a personal one. He is alluding to the fact you're saying, okay, I couldn't have written this book in my 30s, but in my 50s, I now have the perspective that you said you have some regrets. Todd is curious if you can talk a little bit more about them. He's putting me on the hot seat as well.
That's cool.
Can you give us an example?
I got all kinds of them. I'll give you one. I'll give you one that really bugs me, Todd. In Dorie is kindness regrets. In this database of 16,000 regrets that I have a huge number of regrets about bullying. And when I look back on my own life, I was actually never a bully. I don't think I've ever, at least I have no conscious memory of ever bullying anybody at any point in my entire life. But there were many circumstances in my life as a younger person, both sort of elementary school, junior high, high school, college, as a younger person in the workforce, where I saw people being mistreated. I saw people being left out. I saw people being excluded. And I knew that was happening. And I knew that it was wrong. And I didn't do a damn thing. I didn't speak up. I didn't step in, and that bugs me. It bugs me even a little talking about it right now. But that bugging is a good thing, okay? Because that bugging is a signal. So when I feel bugged by that, I can say, no regrets, never look backward, all right? That's a bad idea. I could also say, oh my God, Dan, you're the worst person in the world. You're just a horrible, wretched human being. That's bad too. What I should do is say, wait a second, this feeling that I'm having right now, this negative feeling is telling me something. And it has been telling me something. It's telling me something that I value, that I didn't realize how much I valued until acknowledging this. What do I value? I value kindness. And as I thought about it, take a step back, I realized that a lot of the people I admire are people who are kind. And that I had not been as kind of a person as I could have been earlier in my life. So something that I value, and also something that I should do, which is that I should freaking be kinder. And being kind is not necessarily not being a bully, because I was never a bully. And so this is small, Dorie and Todd, but if you were to see me at social gatherings, back in the days we had social gatherings, and there would be this is such a small thing, but it's meaningful to me. There'd be maybe a clutch of people together, and somebody maybe standing off who's not part of the conversation. I now routinely, hey, Fred, come on in here and talk with us. Always do that kind of thing. And I would not have done that had I not reckoned with those regrets. Now, am I going to win the Nobel Peace Prize for those small efforts at social gatherings? No. But did acknowledging that regret clarify my values and give me instruction about what to do in the future? Absolutely.
I love that. That's a great answer, Dan. Thank you. And similarly, and Todd, thank you for the question. Previous guest on Better, Todd Churches, author of Visual Leadership. So building on that, actually, I think about something similar. I remember I had a birthday party when I was in 4th grade, and I had not yet figured out a crucial lesson, which I now understand, which is that if you are having a party, you either need to invite a tiny number of people or everyone. You can't go halfway on that. And I remember I did not invite everyone, and the people who were not invited were not happy. And I've learned, I think, similarly, a lesson about inclusivity, which I've tried to practice since then.
But this is really important, Dorie, okay? Because here you think about all the things in your fourth grade Dorie that you don't remember. You remember this. That's telling you something. It's a signal. It's a signal about your values, and it's instruction about what adult Dorie should be doing, which is inviting me to your parties.
Exactly. You get invited every time, Dan. It's you're always welcome. Yes, Dan Pink. author of The Power of Regret. And we want to say hi to the great folks who are tuning in here. We have people from around the world. Scott is here from Baltimore. Our past guest, Damon Brown, author Damon Brown, is tuning in to join us. We have Ludmilla from Southern California, Tevin from Scotland. We have Riley from West Palm Beach, Joanne from Vancouver. We have Christian from Colombia, Bonita from St. Louis, Sean from Nevada, Kathy from Houston. We've got Lisa in New York and Laura from London. Really glad to have all of you guys here. So, Dan, I want to pause for a moment to go back to one of your previous books. Now, 20 plus years ago, you wrote a book called Free Agent Nation. And I feel like I would be remiss if I did not return to this briefly, because we're now in the throes of the so-called Great Resignation. We've had literally tens of millions of Americans over the course of the past year leaving their jobs, many of them striking out on their own or, trading up to different and better things. I'm curious, I'd just love to get your perspective as an author that very early on called that trend. What do you make of the situation? And do you think that this is a temporary blip caused by the pandemic? Do you think that this is evocative of a lasting change? Or how are you making sense of this phenomenon?
I'm not sure. I think that I think it's both cyclical and secular to think about this. So I think there's been a secular. I think one of the big secular trends is this idea that that most kinds of employment are, for better or worse, precarious. That you're not going to have lifetime job security anywhere, and that a lot of the risk has shifted from individuals to organizations. This is true in everything from pensions to health insurance to a whole array of things, and that's been going on for a while. And I wrote about it 100 years ago in Free Agent Nation, and it's continuing today. And I think that at a certain point, you have people who say, "Okay, wait a second. If I'm not going to be treated well, and I'm not going to get security, like, what's the point? Why not just either go out on my own or job hop?" So I think that's a huge part of it. I think another part of it, and I do think that for a lot of people, this pandemic has exposed the idea. It's like, oh my God, my job is terrible. This is a terrible job. Like, I'm not being treated well, and I'm not going to take it anymore. So I think, and I think you see that with this gurgling resurgence of the union movement in America for the first time in many, many decades. So I do think there's something secular going on here, and that people are trying to work smarter, live a little bit better, use their work as a source of meaning, and not endure all of the BS. At the same time, there's also the cyclical trend that the labor markets are really tight right now, and so people have a lot more say. I think that the bigger issue is that in general, in the labor markets of America, talented people need organizations less than organizations need talented people. That if you have talent, you have a lot more opportunities. The problem is that a lot of people haven't been able to nurture their talent as robustly as other people have, and so that's a huge public policy question.
Yeah, really interesting, Dan. Thank you very much. We're here with Daniel Pink, author of The Power of Regret. His website is danpink.com. You can learn about him. You can pick up a copy of his book. If you're enjoying the conversation, hit the like and share button so that your friends can enjoy Dan's insights as well on our weekly Newsweek Better show. Dan, a question that came in from one LinkedIn user that I think is interesting, probably on a lot of people's minds because these emotions seem to often be correlated. They want to know how does guilt correlate to regret? By dealing with that negative emotion, do we lessen it? How do those two emotions kind of work together?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. In my view, guilt is a component of regret. So guilt is, when I talk about these four core regrets, these moral regrets, guilt is a component typically of these moral regrets. What's interesting about guilt is that guilt is not always, but it's often the result of an action. All right, I hurt somebody, I wronged somebody, I cheated, I lied. All right, so it's often, not always, the result of an action. The majority of people's regrets are inactions. So it's harder to have, it's harder, not impossible to have a regret about an inaction. So I look at guilt as a subset of regret, particularly when it comes to moral actions. And the thing about guilt is that we have mechanisms to deal with that in some ways. So if I've hurt somebody, I can apologize. If I've stolen from somebody, I can make amends. There are ways to undo. With action regrets, we can undo them. We can make restitution. We can take action to make the other side whole. With inaction regrets, we don't have those options, which is why inaction regrets linger for so long.
Yeah, that's such a good observation. It's true. It's kind of creating this open loop that can't be resolved in some way.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it is with inaction regrets. The question of what if lingers. It's exactly right. So with certain kinds of action regrets, you can close the door. So for instance, I have a lot of people in this book, as you know, Dorie, who went out and got themselves tattoos that say no regrets. But then I have a guy who went and got a tattoo that's on his left arm, because that was he was in the military, he was in the army, and that's the arm he would see when he was shooting his rifle. He got a tattoo that said no regrets on his left arm. And then 14 years later, he regretted that and had his tattoo removed. So you can undo certain kinds of regrets.
Yes, thank goodness. Many of them are reversible. That's great.
Right. Well, you had your no regrets tattoo removed, right, Dorie?
Oh, totally. Yeah. You used to be right here. So we want to say hi to some of our great friends tuning in. Justine is here from Poland. Jenny is here from the Dominican Republic. Jay from Charlotte, North Carolina. We've got Adnan from Turkey, and we have Sayed from Iran, Marcy from New Jersey. We've got Richard in Pittsburgh, with Matthew from Ohio. We have Holly from the Hudson Valley. So welcome to all of you, and we're so glad to have you here with a conversation with Dan Pink. Now, Dan, one of your previous books, your very successful previous book, was called Drive, and I'm curious, over the past 2 years of the pandemic, so many people have been languishing. So many people have felt just an utter lack of motivation, or kind of overall discombobulation. I would be curious to hear your thoughts for people that are, sort of trying to rouse themselves now that, hopefully we are emerging from this period. What would be your advice about harnessing their own inherent sense of drive and motivation to be able to move forward in a positive way?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to normalize normalize that feeling, to recognize how ubiquitous it is. I feel that way too, and so you're not alone, and what's happening now is perfectly understandable. Now, as for the remedies, there are some interesting things that one can do to find some remedies. And my read of the research is that two of the things that are most important are developing things that are so engaging they put you into a flow experience. A flow experience is when the challenge is so exquisitely matched to the task that you lose a sense of time, you lose a sense of self, you're really into it. So find things, if you can, in your life, in your work, where you're experiencing that state of flow. You're not going to be in that state of flow all the time, but those moments of the state of flow, in that state of flow, will actually sustain you during those moments when you are feeling lesser and more painful emotions. That's one thing. The second thing is doing things that have a purpose. I'm very taken by a lot of the research on purpose, showing that one way to overcome that feeling of stall, of languishing, of being thwarted, is to not so much focus on what am I going to do to get out of that ditch, but to actually think about what can I do that has a higher purpose? What can I do to contribute to the world? What can I do to help another person? What can I do to sort of go beyond myself? And in a weird, almost paradoxical, Zen-like way, that when you go beyond yourself, you actually, the knock-on effect is that you help yourself. So look for flow experiences. So I guess it's three things. Don't freak out that you're alone, because you're not. Everybody's that way. Second, look for flow experiences, and then look for something that gives you a little bit of more transcendence, a little bit more purpose. The other thing also is that we are now in the era right now, in terms of where we are right now today in this pandemic. Forget about big, hairy, audacious goals for now. Go for small wins that cascade to small wins that cascade to small wins. That's my advice on that front.
Really powerful, Dan. Thank you. I think we have time for one more speed round question from
Okay.
fellow author Kurt Davis. He's curious, how long does it take for you to research, write, and publish your books? What's the
lifetime.
logistics?
A lifetime. No, this one, it usually takes me 2 or 3 years of pretty intense work. I often will stop doing other things, and because I'm a terrible multitasker, so I will, stop doing anything else and devote myself fully to researching and writing. It takes me a long time. I'm pretty slow and methodical in how I do these things. So I'm a tortoise, definitely a tortoise, not a hare. I am also a really terrible multitasker. So what I do is I just, for 2 or 3 years, just tortoise my way to the office every morning, do a little work, often very little, but sort of get some small wins, make a little progress, show up the next day. I look at writing as, I have a very sort of blue collar approach to writing, which is that I'm a bricklayer. So I show up in the office every morning and I try to lay a couple of bricks, and then I come back the next day and try to lay a couple of bricks, and come back the next day and try to lay a couple of bricks.
But Dan, you're building a cathedral.
No, I'm just building a wall. I just want it to stand up. I'm not doing anything more exalted than that. But the thing is, if you do that over time, every single day, if you just freaking show up, eventually they begin to form something.
That is awesome. Daniel Pink, thank you so much. I think we've got a great summary here. Aiko is tuning in from Silicon Valley. She says, regret is an opportunity to make things right.
Well said.
We've been here with Daniel Pink. He's the author of The Power of Regret. You can learn more about him at danpink.com. Thank you all for tuning in. And Daniel Pink, thanks for joining us.
Dorie Clark, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And thanks to your fans all over the world for tuning in.
Thank you.
And make sure you hit the like button and share for Dorie. Do it right now, everybody.
Love it. Thank you and take care.